good morning, everyone. I'm Dyana Hesson, and I'm an accountant. No, not really. I'm a professional artist, and by show of hands, how many of you consider yourself a professional artist? Awesome. Well, you know it's a blessed life indeed. You get to wake up in the morning and make a mess in your studio and hopefully hit your pillow at the end of the day happily exhausted because you've created something and done something wonderful. Well, if you don't know my work, I'm what I like to call a botanical artist. I work in oil on canvas, and 2 years ago I had my retrospective at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix. It was my 25-year retrospective. Well, when I was approaching that retrospective, I'm going to do this. Let's see. Hang on. I wanted to create an iconic piece of art that you're going to see any moment now. Well, actually, that's the piece I created, but I wanted to show you. And one morning I was walking through my neighborhood and there was a blooming saguaro, which we see those quite a bit here in the Southwest, but this one was particularly enamoring to me. It was full of bees, the blossoms were full of bees, and as I craned my neck upward to enjoy this blossom, I thought, well, that's the iconic piece. That's the piece that would be amazing for the show. So I built a giant canvas. How many of you have built your own canvases before? Oy. I'd like to hire that part out, huh? Anyway, it was around 80 by 80, I think, and got to work. I work in layers. I like to liken my work to, do you remember the old days when we would develop a photograph? You would go into the dark room and put it into the developer and slowly it would come to focus. That's how I see my work. I work in thin layers. Each painting gets painted over 3 or 4 times until it's sharp, until it's the way I like it, or until my husband says it's done. So the painting slowly came into focus, as did my retrospective, and I'll share a little bit more about that with you this morning. This is us getting ready for the retrospective, hanging the work in the gallery. This is myself and my gallery owner, Christy Manolito of Bonner David Galleries in Scottsdale. I've been with her gallery for 15 years now, and there we are getting ready to exhibit the work. Here's the show hung. It was called Return to the Desert. Had a theme. I'll talk more about that later. And there's another piece, or some pieces from the show. And again, I'll share a little bit. Oh, and there's some friends. In life, as an artist, you must have friends, correct? Correct. Well, I created some pieces for the show that were special to the show, and I just wanted to show a couple of them to you. This was called Arizona Bonfire. It was inspired by an aloe that was blooming in the garden. This is called Beauty and the Beast, aptly named because of the juxtaposition of the delicate primrose with the very ominous agave. It's one of my favorites. This is called Arizona Wink. One blossom open, one closed, as if the desert is winking at you, flirting with you. This is called Arizona Lipstick. I'd wear this shade. Would any of you ladies wear this shade? We'll talk more about lipstick later too. But back to the bees. So after I finished this painting, I was walking in my neighborhood again, and it was after a giant rainstorm. And sadly, as you know, some of the swirls get sucked up with water, and they get so heavy, and they just, bleh. And it had fallen over against a wall in my neighbor's yard. And like an exhausted hiker waiting for a helicopter ride out of the canyon, it was just done. And I walked by that swirl for days and just hoped they would find a way to save it. And of course they couldn't. It was chopped up and hauled away. But such is life, correct? We never know how much time we have on this planet or with the people that we love, but art outlasts life. And if I have done my job well as an artist, this piece of art will outlast the artist that created it, and it will outlast the swirl that inspired it. And someday, generations from now, people will hopefully look at this painting and marvel at the natural world that inspired it. Well, lest you think that I had all this success overnight, I want to show you a picture of my humble beginnings. Maybe you guys have a photograph like this. It was my art fair booth in Birmingham, Michigan in 1996. We lived there for a short while. Well, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my personal story and some things that I've learned that I believe have been keys to my own success. My goal is to encourage you this morning and to help you to be fearless using the gifts that you've been given to be successful, satisfied, and yes, happily exhausted at the end of each day. And because this room is full of visual artists, we're going to call each of my points, so you remember that first painting, B's. Okay, you with me? Okay, good. Well, if you study successful people, and you should, you will find that they have been passionate and focused in their field, like Lisa shared, from a very young age. So my first B I'd like to share with you today is be who you are, like this little girl. She was always excited about many things, none of which were sitting still in class. She cut her bangs for her portrait, her own bangs. There's a little bite out of her bangs. I grew up in a small gold country town of Auburn, California. If you know Northern California, you know that's nestled between, are you from there? Lodi, close enough. And our family, I have two older brothers, and the Walker family decided that that wasn't a big enough family, so they adopted me in 1966 to be part of their family. And in our family, gardening was a huge part of our culture. Our weekends were spent at the nursery and weeding. Loved weeding. And we had a huge vegetable garden and a flower garden. My mother and brother always had succulents and orchids growing on our patio. That was our family culture. My job in the summer, along with weeding, was to harvest things from our garden and take them to happy neighbors. So squash, vegetables, all sorts of fruits. We had peach trees. I would take those to happy neighbors. Well, I was always a struggling student. I was a bit hyperactive. That's what they called it back then. We didn't have ADHD. It was, she's so hyperactive. But I liked to be creative from a very early age. I published my own newsletter when I was a kid. It was called Kid News with a Z. And my dad worked at a bank, and they had a copy machine at the bank. So he would take my newsletter and run it off. Do you remember that smell? Yeah. And I would hand that out to neighborhood kids, literally walk door to door and hand out my little newsletter. It had crossword puzzle that I would make, probably with wrong spellings of things. Like Lisa mentioned, that's my worst nightmare too. And I put on little skating shows for my neighbors and things like that. So very creative. Well, my focus improved greatly when in grade school, my father gave me his old camera. I immediately started photographing the things that were important to our family culture, so the flowers and the landscape, all the things that I had enjoyed, and I became enamored with how beautiful flowers were close up. I remember I had a neighbor that had gladiolas in her front yard, and each spring they would come up in all those beautiful colors. Well, then I took my camera down and I took pictures of the gladiolas. Well, I struggled in high school, but I was determined to go to college and get a degree. Because when you're learning disabled, I think it's just something you have to prove to yourself, gosh darn it. I enrolled in Southern California and started studying communications. Why, I don't know. It was a practical major, but that was a mistake. That was one of the first of many mistakes. I was not following my first B. I was not being who I really was. Well, I love to encourage young people before life has sucked the dreams out of them. And many times I have parents that will bring their son or daughter to my studio. They're convinced that they're amazing artists. Can you please talk to my daughter and give her some direction? I love to do that. Recently I had a girl in my studio and she had her portfolio and we were looking through it. And she was just not excited to be there. We were just thumbing through the paintings. There was no excitement to show me her work until I asked her why she drew what she drew. Well, that's when her face lit up. All her paintings and drawings were of animals. She loved animals. She was a good drawer, yes, but her passion was animals. And so I said, and I love to ask this question of young people and older people too. If you could do anything, don't overthink it, quick, tell me what it is. She goes, I want to be a veterinarian. And I looked at her mother, and we both went, oh, like, you know. I connected her with a local veterinarian, and she started doing volunteer work and really followed her passion. Which brings me to another B. Be encouraging. Helping others achieve their greatest potential. Oh, I'm getting choked up. You yourself will gain clarity and focus in your own endeavors. I first read about the Algonquin Round Table in Harpo Marx's book, Harpo Speaks. It was a group compiled of New York City writers, critics, actors, and performers who met each day for lunch at the Algonquin Hotel from 1919 to 1928. They dreamed and collaborated. Well, I love this idea, so a few years ago, some artist friends and I, and some of them are in the audience, we started an Algonquin Roundtable type of group for artists. Here we are. We're called the Pop-Tarts, P-O-P, capital T apostrophe A-R-T-S. Can you guys see that? And we meet once a month at an upscale restaurant. We have breakfast and we banter around ideas. And the victories that I have seen come from that group of talented artists is one of the greatest joys in my life. Well, I floundered in college. The only thing, I went to Southern California for college, and it was polluted and crowded, and being a country kid that loved to be outside, it just was not the place for me. However, I did meet and marry this man who's here today. We just celebrated our 32-year wedding anniversary. And he was the one that reminded me of who I really was. Well, he moved me to Arizona. He was from Arizona. His family had grown up here, and so, which I was not excited about that idea initially because I heard it was just this desolate, dry, ugly place full of old people, and and that may be true on some days, but I live in Mesa, so anyway, but I did fall in love with Arizona. Well, it was time to enroll. I registered at ASU, and I had so many credits at that point. I don't know if any of you can relate to this. It was time to buckle down and get that major. You know, I had changed my major several times, and my husband and I were sitting on the couch, and he said, you know, you're a creative person. Why don't you study art? I don't know. That's so logical. Yeah, that would be good. And looky, and we were looking in the catalog, it has the least amount of math. So that's what I did. I enrolled at ASU, and instead of getting C's and D's, I started getting A's. Instead of history, it was art history with pictures to go with the facts and the dates. And it was literally like a light bulb went off in my head. I graduated with honors from ASU. Well, while I was going to school, oh, by the way, this is the first agave I painted while I was at ASU. Very primitive. It was from a friend's photograph. She was in my painting class. It was a black and white photograph, and I made it green. And when it was time to paint, well, what do you paint? You know, how do you decide what you're going to paint? So I returned to the love of my youth, which were the flowers I'd photographed, all those things that were interesting to me. That became the subject of my paintings. Well, all through college, I worked retail. And that is where I learned how to sell and how to set things up and how to make the customer happy. And all these skills have served me really well in my career. Someone once told me regarding showing my art, if you wait till you're ready, you will never be ready. So months before I graduated, I had my first show in Scottsdale. I was at an art walk one night, and I met this nice lady who had a gallery. Her name was Leandra Lewis. I'll never forget her. And she invited me to have a show. Well, my paintings were very primitive, but they were from the heart, and that's how I started. I don't think I sold anything, but that's how I started. Well, my husband and I moved to Michigan shortly after I graduated, but then in 1996, we were able to come back to Arizona. We were delighted to be back in the West. The light came back to my work, and I hit the ground running and began painting and exploring the great outdoors of the Southwest. In 2002, I signed with Bonner David Galleries in Scottsdale and began having yearly showings and created a following. But how do you create a following? Well, that brings me to my next B, be compelling. Now that I had good representation and the opportunity to have yearly shows, I began to think about how I could maximize those opportunities. I work very hard in my studio, I know you guys do too, but how do you convey that? How do you share your mission as an artist with collectors in a way that makes them want to take a second look? Well, being compelling starts with reflection. Why do you create what you create? Well, let me go back to my retail roots for a moment. Think about the great American brands. Think about Polo, Estee Lauder, Martha Stewart. These folks followed the first B. They stayed true to who they were. They knew that from a very young age. When buyers were telling a young Ralph Lauren that he ought to make his ties narrower, he stuck to his guns and made wide, beautiful ties. Lauder built an empire on the belief that beauty was important, and she knew that if women just tried her product, they would believe too. Ever hear of gift with purchase? She created that. She invented that. And Martha Stewart made us believe that perhaps we could create that 7-layer cake, but if we can't, we can buy her beautiful plate, put our store-bought cake on the plate, and guests would never be the wiser. The point is that these folks have an aesthetic, and they stayed true to it. Their confidence in that vision is compelling. Create your brand and let the world come to you. Do not create your brand for the world. So for me, I began thinking about what I wanted to communicate with my art. I created shows based on themes. One year I had a show of white flowers called Fade to White. One year I had a show, all inspired by a trip to Hawaii, called Postcards from Hawaii. I began writing about my art and telling the stories of the inspiration of my art, and to my surprise, people were interested. They were interested too. Your work should stand on its own, yes, but the confidence and conviction you have in your idea of beauty will draw the viewer in further. Well, once my career got some momentum, I was able to add some very fulfilling and exciting dimensions to my business, which brings me to another B, be generous. Because I am an adopted person, adoption has always been near and dear to my heart. So in 2007, I began a partnership with an organization called Show Hope, and very simply, they give financial grants to families who are in the midst of adoption but have run into financial trouble. It's pretty simple. So I created this painting. It's called Show Hope Circle of Love, and to me, it's an illustration of the beauty of adoption. They're all the same kind of flower, but different colors of the flower, tulips, unified in a circle. To me, that shows a family. So every time I sell this print, all the proceeds go to that charity, and then I do fundraisers with my work as well. Just to make your heart melt, here are some of the families we've helped over the years. And a word about limited editions, real quickly. Kind of fits into what I'm talking about. In my business, I can accomplish several goals with the production of limited edition giclées. First of all, because I rarely have an original work on hand, I'm always in a position to donate a piece when I'm asked, and I feel led. I've helped a lot of Valley organizations with their fundraising efforts, and it's a great joy of my life. And also, I do believe, and I've seen firsthand, the value of having affordable pieces of art for your beginning art collectors. They may start with a print and then commission you to paint their dream painting once they are in a position to do so. My prints are all produced locally with the very highest of standards, and I keep control of all my reproductions as well. Well, that didn't keep me busy enough. So in 2011, I started Dyana Hesson Fashions. Remember I said that I worked retail through college? Well, a lot of that time was spent at Nordstrom's behind the counter in the accessory department. And I remember the scarf buyer telling me once that we would never have scarves made in the United States because they would be too cost prohibitive and a customer wouldn't be able to afford them. And that made me sad. I'm very proud of my country and I like to buy made in the USA, and that made me sad. Well, fast forward to modern technology. Now we have the ability to put our designs on fabric, and I started dreaming about what a line of scarves might look like. So I created scarves. All my fabric is made in North Carolina, and I use local ladies to do all the sewing, so it supports other women as well. All my models are local women too. See that girl in the middle? She's trouble. She's here, that's April Howland. She's my artist friend. So we use local, real models, real women that sew the scarves. Also, that gives me an opportunity to give if I feel led, and bless someone with a scarf or give to a charity event or what have you. And it reaches a whole different customer. People that buy my scarves maybe don't necessarily buy my artwork, but that you never know. Well, I'm always looking for opportunities to create art for my state as well. In 2012, I created a special painting for the Arizona Centennial, which was part of an exhibit at the Sky Harbor Airport. Each rose in this painting represents 10 years of Arizona statehood, totaling 100 years. The various colors of the roses, united in the shape of a heart, represent the diversity of our home state here in the Southwest. All the roses were grown in Arizona soil at the Mesa Community College Rose Garden. Has anyone ever been there? Yay! It's beautiful, and the thing about that rose garden is someone else does the pruning and the bug stuff, and you can just walk through the garden and photograph it and enjoy it. Well, we also created a commemorative print of the piece, and then I was able to do fundraising for the rose garden and give a portion back to them, to their garden. This is the picture of the commemorative print we did. By being a part of these exhibits and organizations, that produces valuable networking and worthwhile relationships. Which brings me to my next B, be social. It's not enough to be talented, to sit in your studio day after day creating and never talking about your art with others. If you want to sell your art, the old adage is true. People buy from people. You are the best ambassador for your work. You can explain it best. There's a whole world of people out there who have never met an artist and know nothing about art collecting. It is all very mystical to them. And older art collectors are dying, and it's up to us to create new art collectors. If there's one thing I've learned over the last few years, that you cannot prejudge who might buy your art. Everyone is a potential collector, which brings me to this photo. So this is Estee Lauder. In her autobiography, Estee, A Success Story, Estee Lauder shares a story about a personal appearance she made at the Estee Lauder counter in Frost Brothers department store in San Antonio, Texas. Well, a Mexican woman wearing no shoes and 2 gold teeth walked up to the counter and looked at the gleaming jars wistfully. Well, Lauder sized her up immediately, as she would any customer, and the saleswoman next to her whispered to her and said, "Miss Lauder, don't waste your time with this woman. I know her type. I live around here. She's not going to buy anything." Well, Lauder approached the woman, whose face lit up. And as was her way, Lauder went right to work demonstrating her product on this lovely woman's face. She handed the woman a mirror. The woman looked positively radiant. She did not speak English, and Lauder could not speak Spanish, but still, at this moment, they had a bond. The woman reached into her modest black purse, which was literally overflowing with dollars, and bought 2 of everything that Lauder had tried on her face. And the next day, her family, her relatives, all did the same. And Lauder writes of this, "I'll never forget her. She symbolized so much for me. Never be patronizing. Never underestimate any woman's desire for beauty. That proud woman embodies my whole philosophy. I would be on the road for the rest of my life, and in ways, always touching faces and always making the sale that others said wasn't possible." Something I am very proud of is the amount of first-time art buyers that I have. And again, many of them are like the woman in Estee Lauder's story. Not fancy, wealthy people at all, but part of being social, but people just that have connected with what I am and what I do. Part of being social, too, should include social media, and Lisa talked about that a bit. You will have access to people you would never meet otherwise. Everyone speaks a different language. Some people like a phone call. Some people like an email. Some people want to walk into a gallery. Some people will find you on Facebook, some on Instagram, and if you don't speak their language, you're going to miss someone. Also, you might miss out on the opportunity to collaborate. This picture always, I'm going to click it again. This painting was inspired by another social media user who is a succulent grower in Santa Barbara, California. We connected on social media, and I just fell in love with this picture. And as you've seen before, I like hearts. So I asked if I could have permission to paint from it, and of course he said yes. And in the end, he gained a bunch of new followers because of my painting, and I gained a bunch of new followers because we collaborated. So that's a valuable aspect of being on social media, is you'll find people that speak your language. Well, a couple of years ago, I hopped begrudgingly on Instagram. It was when I was preparing for my retrospective at the Desert Botanical Garden and writing my book, so the timing was good to create a following and share the process. Slowly, I had followers follow me, and I followed them back, and it was fun to connect with people based on hashtagged interest. So succulent growers, people that like adventures, people that like hiking, it's all a hashtag, and you find your people that way. One such user was, her username was Mishmashdu, and this is a picture of her. I have to confess I did not follow her back at first, but she was so persistent in liking my posts and commenting that I finally followed her back. Well, one day I got a message from her, and she said, "Diana, how long does it take to get from Redondo Beach, California to the Desert Botanical Garden?" I'm like, I don't know, 6, 7 hours. She had never been to Arizona. She lives in California. Turns out she, her husband, and her son were thinking about coming to Arizona for spring break. They had seen me preparing for my show. They had seen my posts from the garden. She loves succulents. We both love dogs, you know. And so sure enough, she decided to come. And I told her, if you come and you're here over a Thursday night, I'd love to meet you in person. I'll be at the Scottsdale Art Walk. I'll meet you at the gallery. So she and her family drove right to the garden. They saw the exhibit. They bought succulents. They had a great day. She sent me this selfie of her next to her favorite painting in the exhibit. She was just giddy. That night, I went to Bonner David Galleries to meet her. I walked in. Little tiny gal. She came running up to me and she gave me a hug. It was so good to meet her. I looked over, and at the front desk, her husband was writing a check, buying this painting. That was their very first trip to Arizona. That was their very first piece of original art. And they now own 4 Hesson originals, and she's a dear friend. So you just never know. Which brings me to another B. Be an ambassador. Share what you do, share about the things you love, be honest about your struggles related to being an artist and about your process. It doesn't have to be a mystery. Be compelling, and others will be drawn to what you do. And my next B I want to share with you is be ready. Julie Andrews once said, "Sometimes opportunities float right by your nose. Work hard, apply yourself, and be ready. When opportunity comes, you can grab it." Isn't she a classy lady? I should send her a scarf. Well, time management can be a struggle for artists. There's so much to do, and there's only so much time to develop all the great ideas that we have. But you need to spend a good amount of time on the tasks that will serve you well if and when opportunity arises. Developing a professional website, having a well-written biography, headshots, professional high-quality pictures of your work at the ready will serve you well and actually save you time and stress when opportunity knocks. Last year, I received a phone call from the editor of Phoenix Home and Garden, Carol Nickel. She said she had good news for me. When I returned her call, she shared that I had been chosen to receive the coveted 2017 Master of the Southwest Award. There would be a large spread in the March issue and a ceremony and plenty of good press to follow. I was and continue to be very honored by this award. Well, after I picked myself off the floor, I went to work making sure I had what I needed to maximize that opportunity. They would send writer Judy Harper to my home to interview me, a photographer to do a headshot. They would need good quality photos of my work for the spread. Well, I'd already worked with Judy in the past, so when the time came, I had all my talking points in order. When she came to visit me, I had a gift for her to thank her for coming. I prepared an acceptance speech honoring their industry and thanking the important people that had supported me. And there's that night. So that was a tremendous honor. And again, I'm so grateful that I had all those little pieces in play because I had to move quite quickly. Because as you know, publishing, they don't wait. And you don't want bad things out there of your work. You want the very best out there of your work. Well, my next B I want to share with you is to be brave. If you have chosen the profession of fine artist, you are already, no doubt, brave. Write down big and small goals. Go to exhibits of successful artists. Look at competitors' work. Keep an eye on your rivals. I know the word rival has a negative connotation, but it can be a good motivation to keep you on your toes and avoid complacency. Push yourself and dream big. I subscribe to many magazines, and on Sunday I like to keep a quiet house and just thumb through the magazines and let myself be inspired by the images. It could be a travel image or an upcoming art exhibit somewhere. I dog ear the page, I circle things, I make notes, I get back to it, and it does get your creative juices flowing, and it maybe will help you with your goals as well, like maybe next year I'm going to be in that magazine, that sort of thing. Well, these types of things get me thinking, and one such thought hit me hard. As 2016 approached, I began dreaming about having my 25-year retrospective in the perfect place. Well, the Desert Botanical Garden had always been a big source of inspiration for me, and they had a small exhibit space. I had given to their Dinner on the Desert fundraiser for many years, and I had developed good contacts with the garden. So be generous, be social. I had nothing to lose. I wrote a well-crafted, compelling letter of inquiry to the contact I'd always worked with on the fundraisers, and she wrote back and told me that I should inquire with so-and-so and they would be deciding on their exhibit schedule soon. So I got together with my gallery and we developed a proposal. It was a great proposal. This was a piece that we included in the proposal to show them what we would create if they granted us, like going to the king, I grant you a yes. Anyway, well, the answer was yes. It was a huge undertaking, deciding what pieces to include, contacting collectors, coordinating with the garden, PR, creating new work for the show. We got to work and didn't look back. We would be ready. But what about a coffee table book? Wouldn't this be a great time to have a coffee table book? Well, be ready, right? So was I ready to do a coffee table book? Well, I had documented 250 paintings in my career. They were all copyrighted. I had photographs of all of them. I had saved all the stories I'd written about my work. I had a friend who was a graphic designer who could do the work for me in trade for a painting. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do a coffee table book. Well, I began to call other artists that had done books, got advice from them. I found a publisher here in Tucson, Arizona Lithographers. They helped me publish my book. I created a Facebook group where I could ask aesthetic people and business-minded people their opinions. So I would work on a part of it, and I would say, what do you think of this font? Or what do you think of this image, this one or this one? Just got everyone involved as much as I could. Well, books aren't hugely profitable, especially if published in the USA, but that was a core value I was not willing to let go of. And as my artist friend Gail Morris once told me, your book will be the nicest business card you ever put in the hands of a potential collector, and she was right. Well, there's my book at my first book signing. In the middle, that's Emily Grober. She was my book editor. And on the end there is Chris. She was my designer, my book designer. And this is my display at the Desert Botanical Garden. So is my book, my note cards, and my scarves. And this is my book cover. Well, the reach of my retrospective was tremendous. It's still having tremendous reach. And so comes another B. Always be thankful. I'm extremely thankful to my collectors who lay down their hard-earned money to buy and live with my creations. I'm sure you ladies feel the same. I just want to share a couple of collectors' images with you. This is a very large piece I created for a home in Puako, Hawaii. Isn't that gorgeous? Wouldn't you just love to be sitting there right now? I actually got to stay there too, so that was quite a blessing. This is a home of some really avid collectors in Carefree, Arizona. I love that my work goes with all sorts of people's tastes. I mean, that's how it should work, right? This is a piece I created for some collectors in Scottsdale. This image was actually in Phoenix Home and Garden. I did the one over the bed, obviously, not the one over the fireplace, although I like the way that, I love that room. It's just great color. This is one of my postcards from Hawaii, pieces of orchids in a beautiful dining room in Mesa, Arizona. And this is the piece from this show. I'd like to end our time here by sharing a little bit about this piece, which hopefully you saw last night or maybe you'll see later today. Well, I love that the ladies at AWA created a theme for the show. Remember I talked about I love to work in themes. I just think that gets your creative juices flowing. And I'm not a Western artist per se, but so I thought, oh, what could I create for the show that would fit the theme? Well, I stayed true to who I am, lover of outdoors and adventure and creation. This piece is called Arizona Campfire and Velvet Blue Sky at Twilight. And I'm going to share a little bit about the inspiration of this piece. Well, the West is a romantic place, would you agree? No one knew this better than Zane Grey. He created timeless Western characters and set them in the most beautiful places in Arizona. His descriptions of the desert, its plants, and its vast sky were so elaborate they became characters in their own right. Well, on a recent hiking trip to Fossil Springs near Strawberry, Arizona, I spotted this yucca on the ridge. The curly fibers and transparent blooms captivated me. Back at home at night, as I neared the end of Gray's book, Desert Gold, I read about the main character's settling in for the night in a remote part of the Arizona desert. As the sun set and the embers of their campfire rose, Zane carefully describes the scene, with Gale, his main character, in the center. And he writes, "At night, he formed a habit of climbing up the lava slope as far as the smooth trail extended, and there on the promontory, he paced to and fro, watching the stars, and sat stone still for hours looking down at the vast void with its moving, changing shadows. And from that promontory, he gazed up at the velvet blue sky, deep and dark, bright with a million cold, distant, blinking stars, and he grasped a little of the meaning of infinitude." Why don't we use that word more? Infinitude, I think, is isn't that a great word? I love that word. Well, Gray wrote those words in 1913, but the scenes that he describes can still be found today. You need only to venture out to see it. So I hope this painting compels you to find your sky of a million stars, whether that be dreams in your art or adventures in your life. Well, back to this guy. By the way, this painting is called Look Up, Be Happy. Speaking of happy, does anyone have a birthday today? This week? Yesterday? Your birthday is yesterday? Yeah? Well. And by the way, you deserve way more than a packet of note cards. Oh my goodness.
This has been quite the weekend for birthday celebration.
Yes, yes. And oh, you're very welcome. And by the way, you ladies, just looking at that work last night, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Just dumbfounding. Like, you just gasp. I gasp at your abilities. You ladies are the best of the best. And I know what's hanging on the wall represents so much time and so much effort, and I just want you to know that it brings us joy as viewers. Thank you for working so hard. We're all in the trenches doing that, but just really, from the bottom of my heart, keep doing it. And if you're having a bad year, we've all had bad years, please, don't give up, just keep doing it. You'll find your audience, and sometimes it's an audience of one, and that's okay. Well, I want to end our time by sharing my mission statement with you. This is me in my studio. There's my little dog in his bed. Well, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be a fine artist in today's world. It's a pleasure because I get to wake every morning and do what I love to do and pour my soul into creating something beautiful. It's also a privilege because with creating comes responsibility. My desire is to create a safe place where the viewer's eye can land and rest for a while. It has been said that only two things can pierce our hearts, and that is beauty and affliction. And if this is so, we need a measure of beauty in our lives. Equal to the proportion of affliction. I know you guys all have had hard times, right? So my unspoken agreement with my collectors and fans is that I will always bring the very best to you. I will work very hard to bring a measure of beauty into your world with the abilities that God has given me. Well, thank you for joining me today. I just really appreciate your time, and thank you.
We've certainly had a theme this morning. Two very different women doing very different things, yet united with the idea that they were just going to go out and define their lives on their terms and make it happen. And whatever extra avenues they needed to pursue to make that happen, they did. And the other thing I picked up after listening to both of you, I was struck with how important the idea of a brand is and branding. And it was very clear with both, in very different ways, but very clear that it's important. All right, we have questions, I'm sure, for Dyana. Questions?
And I need a pair.
Everybody's still kind of,
Where can we buy a scarf?
Oh. They're on my website.
Oh, great.
They are on my website, yes. You can order them that way, for sure. I'd love to send you one, yeah. Oh, and the museum, the shop has graciously allowed us to sell copies of my book today. If you get one, I would love to sign it for you. That was very sweet of them to do that.
It's located right across the courtyard.
Right across the courtyard. So,
I actually have a question. So as a businesswoman, you've created these other streams of revenue. With the scarf, you've got the book, you've got your note cards, and they're all branded with the art you create. Would you say that those other revenue streams are an important part of your income now, or would you say that, or do you look at them more as a marketing tool?
I think they are both. They really are both. Phoenix Home and Garden did a little blurb on my note cards recently. I sent them a press release. I had some new ones printed, and they were kind enough to put it in their little section that you don't pay for. That's, you know, and the orders just streamed in. Now that's just a $15 purchase, but when you have a lot of them in 1 month, and maybe you're not painting so much that month, that's a huge, it's income. And your profit margin on something like that is higher than, let's say, a book. So in my portfolio of things that I sell, you know, everything has a little bit different profit margin. Obviously on an original painting, you know, where you're selling it for $15,000 or whatever, that's a good amount of income. Of course, if you're with a gallery, the gallery gets half, which is fine, they work hard. But, so no cards, you know, are a smaller purchase, but still it all adds up. And sometimes someone will buy a book, okay, I don't make that much money on the book, but it causes them to want to do a commission. So it really does pay for itself. So it's kind of the bottom line. You just have to look at the bottom line. But it's all been very valuable, I would say, to me. And again, it's a vehicle, you meet people and are introduced to people that you never would meet otherwise, you know. So.
I just have a comment. I think you should do a sideline on public speaking.
Oh.
Because that was probably the most interesting lecture I've heard
Oh my
in
goodness,
so
thank
many
you.
years.
I was so nervous. I know you artist ladies understand this, but you're probably all frustrated perfectionists on some level. And you just want everything you do to be just so and so.
Well, you nailed it.
Oh,
So.
thank you. Thank you.